Welcome back to lesson 14 of Write That Novel Now. Jim Parsons, your personal writing mentor. Today we're going to continue talking about delineating your characters, particularly your main character, of course. And I have reserved for this lesson, it might even spill over into two, how to go about physical description, what their faces look like and what clothing they're wearing. Because clothing often is very important because people wear clothes as a symbol of who they are very often. Now, I believe it's one of the hardest writing feats. And I can prove this because so many manuscripts that come across my desk, the female characters are rather Barbie-like. They've all got long blonde hair, blue eyes, and big personalities. And the men are tall, dark, and handsome, unless they're the villain, in which case they're short, squat, and ugly. Male writers writing that rah-rah stuff tend to do he stood in the doorway, 6'2", 300 pounds, and carrying an AK-47. I like to diffuse it by adding a line, and wearing a sequined posing pouch. I do lose quite a few writing clients that way. Anyway. The issue is when you see 6'2", 300 pounds, you think to yourself, is this a novel or is it a police incident report? So these are some of the problems. It's not easy. Let's face it. There's not a lot to work with. There's about 4 hair colours. There's about 4 eye colours. Noses come in small, medium, large. Ears either flap or try and get back inside. So there's not a lot to work with. There are 2 methods that I believe you can use. I'm going to give the difficult one first, and I don't know whether I'll get to the second one until the next lesson. We will see how we go. The first one is very difficult because it relies on your writing skills. If you're a novice writer and you haven't developed the skills, you may not be able to do it this way, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't try, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't practice, because you're not going to be able to do it unless you practice very regularly at these skills. Now, what I'm talking about is simply you're describing it as the narrator. You're describing this person's physical appearance as a narrator. And of course, you want your characters to stand out. I often say to my writing clients, you have to design a character so that one of your avid readers, if they saw this character walking down the street, could yell out, "There he goes, that's so-and-so out of," whatever, the book title, "I'll swear that's Darth Vader. I know him by his walk." So that's what you're trying to aim for, something unique about your character. Everybody has special features, quirks, nuances. Right? And you might say, well, my character is just a plain old ordinary person. There's nothing at all that stands out about her. Well, listen, come on, you're writing this character. Give them a wart on the nose. Don't tell me there's nothing unique about them. Make something unique. You can do it. You can do it. Something. See this? It's called mallet finger. I can't straighten that finger. If you can't think of anything else, give your plain ordinary character mallet finger. Okay, this technique I want to tell you about, well, it's not a technique, it's simply writing. It's writing in such a way that you find unusual ways to talk about what is ordinary, what is here in everybody. And one of the things you can do, of course, is use very strong imagery, use metaphors and similes so that you strike the reader with the unusual language you're using and they think, oh yeah, it might look like that. Okay. Now, this is not something that I can give you a step-by-step process. I can only say that's what you could aim for. All I can do is illustrate it. And I'm going to illustrate it with short passages out of 3 of my own books. It's my party and I can sing if I want to. In fact, I'm being very brave. I'm putting myself on the line here, putting my own writing on the line. If you think it's great and you like the books, tell all your friends. If you think it's crap, I don't have to worry. You probably don't have any friends anyway. The first one I want to read to you is from this one, Aunt Harriet's Legacy, which I mentioned in an earlier lesson. It's set in the 1850s, colonial Australia. And in the passage I want to read, the central character, Sarah, young girl, 19, is going to assist the school. At the primary school, there are too many kids for the teacher, who apparently is a tyrant. Mr. Burdock is a tyrant. So she turns up on the first day, and I will now read the passage. She gets to the open doorway. I stood in the open doorway. The master did not turn his head, but remained leaning slightly forward, his eyes fixed on the scholars as if engaged in a terrible battle of wills. It was clear that he knew I was there, for without turning his head, he called, "Yes, yes, which one of them do you want?" "You, Mr. Burdock," I answered as sweetly as I could. He lost his concentration momentarily and shot a wild look in my direction before fixing the class in a glare once more. He was an enormous man, both tall and broad. His domed head was shiny bald and separated from his blazing eyes by a series of deep corrugations. From beneath his bulbous nose there sprouted the most unruly moustache and beard I had ever seen, a black wiry tangle that spread across his chest like some virulent weed. His mouth was only visible when he opened it to speak, which he shortly did in a hoarse whisper, redolent with menace. "I am going to the door, children. Not a movement, not a peep while my back is turned, do you hear?" He suddenly pulled a long cane from behind his back and brought it down on the desk from a great height. The noise was like a ship's cannon. Even I jumped at the sound. In 2 strides, he was in front of me, leaning down to speak. "And you are?" "I am Miss Sarah Lydgate, and I am here to assist you with your class." I extended my hand. Of course. He extended 2 fingers, and it was all I could do to wrap my hand around them. Had I not met him in a classroom, I would have assumed he was the village blacksmith. I formed an instant picture of him in a scarred leather apron with a great hammer in his fist. Okay, that's from Aunt Harriet's Legacy. I would like to believe you have a picture in your mind of Mr. Burdock. Note, I related him to a village blacksmith. His beard is a virulent weed growing on his chest, right? So this is just using your imagination to find different ways to say, this is a big fellow with a bushy beard. Now, you will notice 2 things as I proceed with these readings. One is that I've written in 3 totally different genres. That's an Australian historical saga. You will also see I have enormous trouble keeping humour out of my writing. Even in the most serious passages, something will creep in like that. Even sex scenes. Look, I can't write sex scenes unless they turn out funny. And it's a story of my life. Over the years, I've made an awful lot of women laugh. I'm going to turn now to a first one I published quite a long time back now, called Beetle Creek. And it's in the traditional Australian bush yarn genre. And it's set in the 1950s, I believe, fairly accurate rendition of the 1950s, in a small village, once again, and I'm picking on school teachers again. This is chapter 32, and it's a character sketch of the village school teacher, Cecil Dogwood. And Cecil has formed a romantic attachment to the eldest girl in the Burnley family, and he's been invited to dinner. Cecil Dogwood wore a suit, usually a double-breasted navy blue pinstripe monstrosity with broad cuffs that flogged his ankles as he walked. It seems it was one of the attributes that attracted Marcy to him. Cecil's pale face was perpetually flushed and streaming with perspiration. "Take your coat off, why don't you, Mr. Dogwood?" Dad suggested one evening as we were clustered around the table ready for Mum's steak and kidney pie. Cecil did so and hung the coat on the back of his chair. He was revealed a somewhat lesser man with sloped shoulders and a concave chest. A little bit further along, I get back to more physical description of Cecil because you don't want to do it too much of a block. Salt these things in among the conversation. So next little bit says, Cecil wore his limp, wavy blonde hair a trifle longer than fashionable. It hung over his collar, and one curl drooped over his forehead. Marcy called it his kiss curl. Dad later commented that Cecil could do with a haircut. So they're just little snippets that you can put in here and there to describe characters. And again, I hope you've got some sort of a picture of Cecil Dogwood as a rather effete. He's a very poetic young man. So this is character description, just using your own skills, your own imagination. The third book, would you believe it, is a kid's book written for about 11-year-olds, Blake the Bored. And it was written for my grandson Blake, who at age 11 was perpetually bored. So that's how it came about. It's a fantasy. Of course, it's got dragons in it. Dragons in an Australian setting with kangaroos and crocodiles, but what the heck. But it starts out in the real world with the very bored Blake, who is embarrassed that he's got to hang around the department store where his mother works in the ladies' underwear section after school every day. He just hates having to be there. And so he turns up. And here he was again, Thursday, the 6th of April, 3:20 p.m, underwear counter, his destiny. Mrs. Selznick, his mother's supervisor, stepped in front of him. Your mother, she's busy with a customer, Sugar Plum. She spoke with a heavy accent that made her sound like a vampire. Sugar Plum. He hated being called Sugar Plum. Even Wimp was better than Sugar Plum. Today his mother was leaning forward, talking earnestly to a short, wide lady who sounded worried. Mrs. Selznick went bustling over to them. My dear, you can trust Mrs. Abbott's judgment. If she says you need a 44 double D fitting Magnum model, you can be sure you do. Mrs. Abbott knows her bras. At school, when tiny Angelino told everyone that his mother drove a fire truck, and Michelle Asher said her mother had amputated a bikie's leg yesterday, he didn't rush in to say, yes, but my mum knows her bras. Mrs. Selznick nodded slowly and delivered her wisdom again. Oh, yes, Mrs. Abbott knows her bras. Not one wisp of hair moved out of place. The pile of glossy gold curls looked so solid that Blake was certain it would sound like a bike helmet if he rapped it with his knuckles. Mrs. Selznick winked at him and twitched her shiny pink lips into a funny smile. Blake knew he shouldn't stare, but he couldn't help it. It was the seagull. Mrs. Selznick always painted a brown line around her lips, and the top line looked like a seagull flying over a pale pink ocean. All right, that's Blake the Bored. 3 samples of my writing, take it or leave it. I hope it does demonstrate to you that you just have to be inventive. It takes a while to develop these skills, and you use all sorts of strange analogies, strange similes and metaphors to make these people stand out. Now, the second technique, which is far easier, I believe, for novice writers to attempt, it's a bit of a process involved, is best shown to you using PowerPoint. And so I'll flip over now to the PowerPoint demonstration. All right, let's have a look at this second idea, this second method of describing physical characteristics of your characters. I believe it's a little easier. Nothing's easy in writing, of course. But for a new writer, there's a way into this, and I'm even going to give you exercises that you can try. Here are 3 tips. First of all, don't just use large blocks of description. Feed the details in slowly. I think a lot of new writers feel that the minute they mention the character's name, they have to tell the reader what this person looks like so the reader understands. The truth of the matter is, readers are imaginative. They picture characters. Sometimes they have to alter those pictures as details emerge that contradict what they think, but that's okay. Readers can do that. I recall a story I read where the character Kerry was going to the office, and I saw Kerry as a young, slim woman with a bob. About 3 pages in, I had to start thinking about this because it just didn't figure, and it turned out that Kerry was a middle-aged man. So I had to do a rapid rethink of the image in my head. But that's okay. Readers can cope with things like that. So feed the details in slowly. A couple of important details, key details, as close to the start of the story as you can to give the readers a head start, and after that take it slowly. Second tip, you can use another character to do a little bit of this informing through dialogue, and I've got some examples of that. I won't go into it greatly here. And the biggest tip of all, incorporate your description, scattering it through the book, incorporate your description into action and setting. It's almost unnoticeable that you're telling the reader something about the physical descriptions. Let's have a look. First of all, dialogue. Dialogue 1. Oh, what do you think, Auntie Jane? Oh, well, dear, blonde does suit you, but they have cut it very short, haven't they? Well, it's a bit like a boy's haircut, really. Oh, I'll get used to it. Oh, I'm sure it's very fashionable. So we see a bit about the relationship between Auntie Jane and whoever this person is. She presumably has had her hair coloured blonde because it suits her. And clearly Auntie Jane is not so sure about this very short, boyish haircut. Okay, so there it is, tucked in there nicely. Second one, an interview. Well, Miss Allen, we would certainly like to offer you this job, but I'm afraid you would have to be prepared to remove the lip and nose rings, as in food prep. This is a health and safety issue. So we get an instant picture of Miss Allen, and it's been slipped in there very nicely. That's one-person dialogues. You can also make it a conversation. Who's the basketballer type you were out with on Saturday, Jan? Oh, you saw us. That's Michael. Did we look silly, him up in the clouds and me barely coming to his chest? All right. So there you go. We've learnt that Michael's a great big bloke and she's only comes up to his chest. Readers can picture that. Far better than if you said she was 5'2". Right, or whatever system you use. Now, dialogue, the danger. Of course, you have to use it judiciously. You probably only get one opportunity per book to do this, because if you have a whole range of characters, every time she meets someone or he meets someone, you have the character commenting on a different aspect of their appearance, the readers are going to think, what's going on here? This is a bit weird. And by the same token, you can't really extend it beyond one thing. You might squeeze in two, but for example, the Auntie Jane one, she's commented on the hair, you know, the reader might start to think this is a ploy if she goes on to say, but I do like your big twinkly earrings, and I do wish you'd change your scuffed shoes and wear heels, and I do like the jeans with the rip across the knee. You have to do this judiciously. You can't just think, oh, here's a great ploy, I'll throw this in, or everything in at once. It's no different then from if you're doing a block that I've told you not to do at the start of the story. Let's have a look at incorporating the description into action and setting, and doing it slowly over a number of pages, even chapters. Yes, it's possible. Once your reader has a bit of an idea and can start forming this picture in their minds, then you can add to that. I'm sure you've all read a book and then gone to the movie and either thought, that's just the way I pictured whoever, or, oh goodness, that's not the way I thought so-and-so would look, right? So, yeah, we as readers do this. Now I'm going to use as my test case, my example, Cynthia, and I'm going to use that cliched stereotype that I've been telling you to avoid. I'm doing this to show you that even when you take the baldest, bluntest description, you can do something with it. You're not altering these facts in any way, but you can at least tell it in a more reasonable way. So here we have Cynthia. Cynthia had beautiful, intense blue eyes, long blonde hair, great looks, and a slim, shapely figure. I'm sure you've come across a lot of Cynthias in books that you've read. All right, what can we do with this very cliched, stereotypical female character? Let's start out very close to the beginning. Might even be the opening paragraph, who knows? And you'll see that I've put it in a setting with a bit of a backstory, and I'm making use of that dialogue I mentioned. Okay. For the cocktail party to celebrate the business merger,
She chose the figure-hugging royal blue satin, which, according to her sister, matched her eyes perfectly. "If I had a doll face and eyes like yours, Synth," Margot would say at least once a year, "I'd have a string of men eating out of my hand." The statement always gave her an intense desire to go wash her hands. So okay, we've got interaction between the sisters, we've got a little bit of humour, a sense of the sort of person Cynthia is, no nonsense, and we learn that she's going to a cocktail party to celebrate a business merger. So you can see how much is packed in here. And almost incidentally, we learn that she's got blue eyes and she must have a reasonable shapely figure if she's prepared to wear figure-hugging royal blue satin. Okay? So that's, let's say, the opening page somewhere of your book. Now, 2 pages later, not immediately, never immediately, 2 pages later, let's say, she arrives at the venue for this party. As she dashed from the cab to the hotel foyer, the wind tousled her hair. She paused to shake her head and run her fingers through the long, thick strands. It was a practical style. She didn't want to be racing off to the hairdresser's every second day. In her rise to the company boardroom, she had occasionally resented her lush hair, until she learned instead to resent the creeps who wanted to treat her as a dumb blonde. Well, she soon showed them who was dumb. There would be a few astonished faces tonight when word got out that she was Baldwin's choice for CEO of the new merged companies. Maybe even a few angry faces. I've gone a lot further than I would recommend, simply to demonstrate. Spent a lot of time describing her hair here. I would have made it just a single sentence, tossed in among running inside. But as you can see, it's tucked into some useful information about her relationships in the firm and the fact that she's going to be the new CEO. So the plot is being advanced as well while we describe. But that one's a little bit over the top. Please be assured it's an exercise, it's not a sample of great writing. Now let's jump to chapter 4. Right, we've seen a lot of Cynthia, we've probably seen her become the CEO, and now Cynthia is quite successful. The red Porsche 911 Carrera convertible was the one she wanted. The salesman held the door open obsequiously as she rolled the seat back to its furthest position. She sat and snaked her long legs in neatly, then tugged her skirt down, conscious that the salesman was getting a lot more than his commission out of this transaction. "I'll take it for the test drive on my own, thanks," she said curtly. So okay, an exchange here, a sense that she's still feeling sexually harassed, and she's very successful. She's now buying a Porsche. But tucked into that are her long legs. Now we move along a bit further and we're in chapter 6. Some sort of a thing happening. This was one meeting she didn't want to be late for, but she was starving. She grabbed a McDonald's hamburger, went to the ladies' washroom and applied a slash of cherry red lipstick. So just a tiny little thing there, the fact that she wears a bright lipstick. And chapter 8, last one. Once seated behind the big oak desk, she kicked off the Gucci 6-inch heels and massaged the painful bunion on her right foot. She noticed for the first time the cluster of spider veins above her ankle. Now look, I threw this one in for all my female viewers so that you really didn't get the knife into Cynthia for being both beautiful and rich. I just want to show that, you know, being successful comes with penalties. Okay, so, you know, Cynthia's okay. Now, how do we go about doing this? There's a process you can follow until you feel comfortable and confident about this. Here's a way to go about it, and we can even make it an exercise for you to do. Step number 1 in the process. Make an unadorned list of the character's attributes. Now, what do I mean by unadorned? What I mean is, don't go writing a lovely flowing paragraph of sentences that all make sense and try to make it writerly. Simply make a list, okay? And I've chosen Gavin. And here's Gavin, here's your list, down the page. He's very tall and thin, he's bald on top at 30, he wears Hawaiian shirts in preference to all others, he wears glasses with heavy black rims, He wears a small gold earring because he thinks it makes him look younger, and he has mallet finger. I threw that in to see if you've been listening. Okay, that's step one. Do that without further thought to anything else. Here's step two. Now jot down what Gavin does, other facts about Gavin, any plot elements if you've already started writing this story, and maybe even some key scenes if you know about them, particularly towards the start, because as you know, we do want to give your readers a few facts to kick off with, then you can add some more in as you go along. So here's what I've come up with about dear old Gavin. He's a florist. He drives an old Volkswagen. He has to deliver flowers to a funeral parlour. And there he meets the girl of his dreams, Portia, who is a mortician. A little more mundane now, he has his own brick pizza oven and makes a great pizza. And his mother is Latvian and his father is Dutch. Alright, it's just a weird collection of facts about Gavin. And if you've got a book on the go, you can do this with your central character. Write down all the things you know about them that's going to happen in the story. And as you go, you can even extend it, throw in a couple of oddities as well, and it might help you extend your understanding of the character as well, some character development. So, okay, that was step two. Step one, write the list of attributes the way you picture your character. And list two, jot down a list of various things about him, non-description things. Step three, you examine that list of events and extraneous details, and now you look and see if any of them might, shall we say, house one of the physical description elements. Now, as I said, especially details or events that can happen early. Maybe you've got to make something happen. Maybe you've got to put him in his Volkswagen driving somewhere at the start to get some details in there. And once you've got a couple of important details in, then you can let the other things filter in over the pages of the first chapter in particular, but even throughout the book. So for example, we can demonstrate that he's a beanpole of a man by showing him folding himself up like a concertina to get into his VW on his way to work. We might show him choosing his Hawaiian shirt from his extensive wardrobe of such shirts, according to what matching flowers are in season. Or we might see him standing in front of the floral display in the florist shop and almost disappearing as if he is wearing camouflage. When we have the big scene where he first meets Portia, he has to deliver a great armful of flowers and he's got them bundled up in his arms. And of course he wants to impress Portia, but is embarrassed to discover that a small blossom has lodged in his gold earring and that he looks silly. Hey, bingo, there's that gold earring comes in. Plus his sense of being very self-conscious and being a little bit older than he should be, at 30, yes. And then Portia leaps in and tries to dislodge the flower. A lovely romantic moment there, but clumsily knocks his glasses off. There's his heavy black-rimmed glasses on the ground, and in his confusion he takes out his handkerchief and mops his bald head, something he would normally only do in private. Okay, do you get the idea? We're matching up ways that we can put a little bit of description here and there. Now, as you can see from this page of writing, you wouldn't want to be doing it in one page. It would look silly. So it's got to be spread out. Bits and pieces here and there, in among other action, in among dialogue, in among plenty of dialogue, description, setting, all that sort of thing, okay? That's the process, a three-part process. I've given you an example of it. So now, take a character that you're working on, if you have a manuscript you're working on. If you haven't started yet, dream up a character, give them some physical characteristics, and then invent some plot details, some background, and have a go at matching them up, just like that. If you're just too lazy to do that for yourself, okay, I will supply you with some written exercises where all you have to do is fill in the gaps.
Well, that concludes lesson 14. It's very difficult on screen to give you exercises in incorporating description into action, but I've got some written exercises if you'd like to access them. My email address will follow. Just email me and I will send them to you. Until next week, Bye from me, and keep safe.